I was sitting in the infusion chair, barely able to lift my head when my phone buzzed. It was a neighbor. "Hey, why are all your things on the lawn?" That's how I found out my husband had changed the locks while I was getting chemo. No warning. No explanation. Just betrayal cold enough to make cancer feel like the second worst thing happening to me. But while he played house with his new girlfriend, he forgot one thing. The mortgage was still in my name. And I still had time, fight, and just enough rage to do something about it. He thought the locks would keep me out. He never expected the whole damn house to slip out from under him. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of elder abuse. Now let me tell you what really happened. I always knew Stanley had a cruel streak. But I never imagined the man I gave 32 years of my life to would turn on me the way he did the day I came home from chemotherapy and found the locks changed. It started in January, the kind of cold that bites straight through your coat and makes you feel like even your bones are tired. I had just turned 64. Not young, not old. Somewhere in between. I was planning to retire that summer. I'd been working at the same elementary school cafeteria since Clinton was in office, and I still had the bruises on my knees to prove it. But that retirement never came. A lump did. Breast cancer. Stage 2. Caught in time, the doctor said. Treatable, he said. But I didn't hear much after that. The word cancer echoed through me like a bell. Stanley was with me in the room, holding my hand, nodding at the doctor like he understood something. But the look in his eyes wasn't concern. It was calculation. I chalked it up to shock. Stanley was never the nurturing type, but I expected at least some semblance of support. We'd raised 3 kids together, paid off a mortgage, buried my mama hand in hand. He wasn't affectionate, but he'd always shown up. That's what I thought marriage was at our age, showing up. But the moment I got sick, Stanley started vanishing. First, it was the little things. No ride to appointments. No groceries in the fridge. The laundry left for me to haul even when my arms were weak from radiation. Then came the woman. Mizzle. 40 maybe. Wore those heels that clicked too loud on linoleum and always smelled like cheap perfume and expensive trouble. "She's just a friend from church," Stanley said with that half grin that always made me uneasy. "She's helping me get my heart right." I was too tired to fight. Between the medication and the nausea and trying to pretend I wasn't terrified, I let it go. I focused on healing. Until the day I came home and my key didn't work. I stood there on the porch, bald, trembling, a grocery bag of prescriptions dangling from my arm, and I turned that key over and over like it was broken. I knocked. No answer. I rang the bell. Nothing. I even sat on the porch swing, confused, until Marisol poked her head out the upstairs window and said, "He's not home. Maybe you should call first next time." I called Stanley. "You should have stayed at the clinic," he said flatly. "You can't be here anymore, Loretta. It's too much for you. Too much for me." It didn't sink in until later that night when I had to sleep in my car, parked outside the Walgreens. My whole chest ached, not from the chemo but from the shame. My name was on that mortgage. I had signed every payment, clipped coupons to keep the lights on, skipped vacations to finish that house the way he wanted. And now I was just out? The next morning I went to my daughter Janelle's place. She was furious. Called Stanley every name in the book, but then looked me in the eye and asked the question I had been avoiding. "Did you check the deed, Mama?" "The what?" Turns out Stanley had gone behind my back while I was in and out of the hospital. He'd forged my signature with help from an old buddy who notarized the documents. He filed to remove my name from the deed. Just like that. On paper, I no longer owned the house I helped build. But he made a mistake. He didn't touch the mortgage. I was still legally responsible for the loan. My name, Loretta Mae Talbot, was on every debt line, every bank agreement. That gave me just enough leverage to do something most people don't think of when they're blindsided by betrayal. I froze the mortgage. It took some convincing. I had to bring medical paperwork, a copy of our marriage license, even the damn utility bills. But once I showed the servicer proof that fraud had occurred, and that I was a co-borrower being locked out without legal separation, they paused it. Put it under review. Wouldn't accept a single payment from Stanley until it was resolved. And Stanley? He went ballistic. Called me a conniving old bat. Accused me of trying to ruin him. But Marisol wasn't sticking around for unpaid bills and foreclosure notices. When she found out the house couldn't be refinanced or sold, she ghosted. left a red stiletto in the driveway and a half-eaten Caesar salad in the fridge. I heard she went back to her sister's place in Savannah. I moved in with Janelle for a few weeks while I got the legal ball rolling. Her boyfriend was a paralegal and knew just the right attorney for women like me. Women who gave everything and got nothing but heartbreak in return. We filed for divorce. Quietly. Carefully. The lawsuit wasn't just about marriage. It was about identity theft, forgery, financial abuse. It wasn't fast and it wasn't cheap. But I had time. Stanley didn't. Every time the bank called and asked for his signature, I was there with documentation. Every time he tried to plead ignorance, we had evidence. The notary who helped him forge my name lost his license, faced charges. And the deed? A judge ordered a full reversal. My name restored in bold, right where it belonged. I didn't want to sell the house. I didn't want to move. I wanted to stay right there. In the place I planted my azaleas and sewed curtains with my bare hands. I renovated every inch of it once he was gone. New floors, new paint. Burned his recliner in the backyard with a smile on my face. Stanley? He moved into a sad little rental on the other side of town. No Marisol. No TV. No rights to anything. That was just the beginning. Because now it was my turn. Stanley didn't understand what hit him. When the bank stopped accepting his payments and flagged the mortgage under investigation, he called me in a fury. What the hell did you do, Loretta? I was sitting at Janelle's kitchen table, sipping warm lemon water to ease the nausea from my last chemo round. I stared at the phone for a second before answering. I froze the mortgage. You what? Since my name is still on the loan and you illegally removed me from the deed, I had the right to report it. The bank agreed. He screamed so loud Janelle winced across the room. She didn't need to hear the rest. She already knew her daddy was done. Stanley had always been the type to gamble just a little too much, flirt just a little too close, push the rules just far enough to get his way. But what he didn't count on was me, the same woman he'd dismissed and underestimated, learning how to fight with paperwork. The mortgage freeze meant foreclosure proceedings were imminent unless the fraud was resolved. And once I filed for divorce and submitted the forged documents to the court, things started unraveling fast. Marisol, for one, didn't take kindly to the idea of living in a house that was technically in limbo. Especially when I started showing up with a clipboard and court orders taped to the door. I wasn't allowed inside yet, but I made my presence known. Every week I had my attorney serve a new notice. Fraud, asset freezing, pending litigation. Eventually Marisol left. How do I know? Because Stanley came crawling. He didn't come to apologize. Not really. He came to beg. I'll never forget the look of him standing on Janelle's porch, worn-out jeans, wild eyes, and that same furrowed brow he used to give the kids when they tracked mud on the carpet. Loretta, baby, we gotta talk. You can talk to my lawyer. Oh, come on, you don't need to do all this. You're upset, I get it, but we were just confused. You forged my signature. You locked me out while I was in a hospital chair fighting for my life. Don't call it confusion. He flinched at that. But not out of guilt. Out of being caught. The court didn't waste time. My lawyer was smart, sharp-tongued, and specialized in elder financial abuse. Once we submitted proof of the forgery, the mismatched signature, the false notary date, the document filed while I was in the oncology unit, it became clear Stanley had not only committed a civil violation, but likely a criminal one. He tried to claim I told him to do it, that I was confused and wanted him to handle everything. But my medical records were precise. I had no memory loss, no dementia, no signs of cognitive decline. He dug his own grave every time he spoke. But even while the legal process picked up speed, I was still living in limbo. Janelle was supportive, but her apartment was cramped and I felt like a burden. Every night I stared at the ceiling, wondering how many women like me had spent their golden years in borrowed bedrooms, tossed out of their homes by men who thought loyalty expired with illness. Then came the court order. Stanley was to vacate the house immediately. The sheriff escorted him out. That was the first night I stood on the porch again. My porch. I stared up at the second-story window, the one Marisol used to peek from like a queen surveying stolen land. And I swore right there under that porch light, they'd never take anything from me again. I moved back in with a sense of quiet triumph. The house was dusty, cluttered with their junk and filled with stale perfume and cigarette ash. But it was mine. And I had plans. I hired a renovation crew. Painted every room fresh, tore out the old carpets, and gutted the master bath Stanley always promised to fix but never did. I made the place beautiful. Not for him. Not even for company. For me. Every nail hammered into a wall was a declaration. Every dollar spent on new fixtures was a reclaiming. And all the while Stanley spiraled. He tried to appeal the ruling. Denied wrongdoing. Claimed the house was emotionally his. The judge laughed. The notary who helped him, charged with professional misconduct. Stanley's name? Removed from the deed entirely. The house was now in my name and my name only. But Stanley wasn't done being a fool. 3 weeks after he was forced out, I got a call from the bank. He had tried to refinance the house, the same one he no longer owned, to take out a loan behind my back. He claimed he had temporary rights to it. They shut him down so fast he didn't even get a full credit check. That's when the divorce was finalized. No alimony. No property. Nothing. He left our marriage with a garbage bag full of clothes and a rusted Toyota Camry. I heard he was sleeping on his cousin's pullout in Shady Pines and Marisol. She blocked him after he asked her for a loan. I didn't feel sorry. Not even a little. Because while I had been battling death, Stanley had been plotting my erasure. But death didn't get me. And neither did he. I stayed. I healed. And every time I opened the door to my house with my key, I remembered who I was before him and who I had become after. Stronger. Sharper. And never, ever naive again. The first thing I did after the court handed me back the deed was change every lock in that house. Every single one. Not because I thought Stanley would sneak back in, though that wouldn't have surprised me, but because I needed to reclaim every inch of what he tried to erase. The old locks, the old paint, the old curtains, they all had to go. Every trace of him and that woman, scrubbed out like rot. I remember standing in the hallway, staring at the light switch she must have touched. The one that flickered when it got cold. I unscrewed the entire plate, threw it in the trash, and had it replaced. That's how deep it went. This was never about just property. It was about dignity. About memory. About the way a woman's sacrifices are treated like dust when she's no longer useful. I poured every cent I had into that renovation. Janelle begged me to slow down to rest, but this was my therapy. While the paint dried and the floors were sanded, I cooked simple meals, did my chemo stretches, and wrote out a new will. This time every word was airtight. No loopholes. No trusting someone to do right. And in that will, I left everything to Janelle and my 2 nieces. I didn't want anything passed to Stanley. Not a teaspoon. Not a photo frame. Not a breath. By March, the house looked like it had never been touched by betrayal. New cherrywood floors in the kitchen. A clawfoot tub I'd dreamed about since I was 30. The garden finally tilled and ready for spring flowers. It felt like stepping into a home that had waited for me to return. I hosted a small gathering. Just a few old friends, Janelle, her fiancé, and my cousin Miriam. We sipped sweet tea, laughed on the porch, and played music in the living room where Stanley once sat silent like a king on a rotting throne. When someone asked, "You plan on selling this place eventually?" I smiled and shook my head. "No," I said. "I plan to outlive the ghosts." Meanwhile, Stanley kept spiraling. He called from a number I didn't recognize. Left a voicemail that started polite and ended in a slurred rant. Said I ruined his life, that he was sleeping in his car, and sick of people treating him like trash. I didn't call back. I didn't even delete the message. I kept it. As a reminder. The last time I saw him in person was outside the courthouse. He was with a public defender trying to settle the forgery charges. His hair had gone gray, wild at the edges, and he'd lost weight. His suit hung off him like it belonged to another man. He looked like the ghost now. He didn't look at me when I passed. But I looked at him. Not with hatred. Not even pity. Just recognition. I finally saw him clearly, without the noise of promises, the fog of shared history, or the illusion of love. He was just a man who thought I wouldn't fight back. Marisol? She was long gone. Someone said she went back to Florida, tried to get into reality TV or open a spa or some nonsense. I didn't follow her story. She had no roots here. Just bad perfume and worse intentions. What mattered was what I built back. One day I stood out front looking at the house from the sidewalk. Fresh paint. New mailbox. Tulips starting to bloom in the yard. A neighbor walked by and paused. "Didn't this place belong to that man and his girlfriend?" she asked. I nodded. It did. But now it belongs to the woman he left behind. She smiled wide. Well, you've made it beautiful. I smiled back, a slow warmth spreading through me. Thank you. That's exactly what I planned. And that night, as I sat in my favorite chair by the front window, new upholstery, soft lamplight, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not because justice had been served in some big dramatic way, but because I got to live. In my home. On my terms. With no one left to silence me, steal from me, or erase my name off a life I helped build. Stanley thought locking me out meant locking me down. But what he didn't realize was this. I was never the one losing the house. He was just losing me. Loretta sat in silence as her lawyer, Darnell Briggs, slid a thick folder across the table. Inside were documents she had never expected to see again. Original copies of the mortgage, emails between Stanley and a shady notary, and forged signatures that matched hers almost too perfectly. They did this, Darnell said, calm but firm. Stanley and his girlfriend. They used a fake notary who's already under investigation for fraud in 2 other cases. Your signature on the deed transfer? It's not admissible. We have enough to freeze the mortgage and initiate a full civil reversal. Loretta felt something inside her snap into place. She had spent weeks sleeping on her niece's couch, going to and from court, watching the home she built rot under someone else's care. But now she had facts, and more importantly, she had power. Stanley had underestimated her. He thought because she was quiet she'd stay quiet. Because she didn't scream when he locked her out, she'd never scream at all. But Loretta had never needed to raise her voice to make herself heard. She had strength in silence. Now she was going to use that silence to destroy everything he thought he stole. Darnell's team filed the injunction that very day. Within 72 hours, the bank placed a freeze on the mortgage. No payments. No refinancing. No access. Stanley and his girlfriend couldn't even change the locks again if they wanted to. The property was officially under legal dispute. Stanley didn't know right away. Loretta made sure of that. She wanted it to hit him like a slap. She wanted him to learn what it felt like to have your home ripped from under you with no warning, no mercy, no apology. She waited until a warm Thursday morning, just as the sun crept through the storm clouds. She walked up the front steps of the house she built with her own money, in clothes Stanley once called "too old lady." This time she didn't knock. She had a court officer with her. Stanley opened the door in boxers and a stained white tank top. Behind him, his girlfriend Crystal was wrapped in a silk robe, holding a half-eaten bowl of cereal. "You can't be here," Stanley barked. "You're trespassing." Loretta calmly handed him a set of papers. He didn't take them at first. When he finally glanced at the bold black stamp, "Emergency injunction filed. Mortgage frozen pending civil review," his face fell like wet plaster. Crystal peeked over his shoulder and cursed. "You used forged documents," Loretta said, her voice steady. "You removed my name from the deed. You committed fraud to steal something I built." Stanley blinked like a child caught stealing. I didn't." "Save it," Loretta said. "The court will sort the rest. But in the meantime, you can't sell this house, you can't rent it, and you sure as hell can't lock me out." The court officer handed Stanley his own copy of the injunction. Stanley tried to argue, he shouted, insulted, begged, but the law was now Loretta's armor. And she was done listening to him. Crystal stormed back inside, slamming dishes. Loretta stood on her front steps and let the moment sink in. This house was hers again. Not just legally, but emotionally. She didn't need to rush inside. She didn't even want to see what they'd done to the rooms. That would come later. For now, just knowing they couldn't strip another inch from her soul was enough. The next few weeks were brutal for Stanley. While Loretta lived with dignity and care at her niece's, Stanley struggled to pay bills he thought he could afford. He called Loretta twice, once to scream and once to beg. She didn't answer either time. The bank sent a foreclosure warning within 30 days. Stanley, having missed 2 mortgage payments and with no legal authority to refinance, was cornered. Crystal left him not long after, taking whatever designer bags she bought with Loretta's money. One day he woke up to a note and an empty closet. She was gone. When the official court hearing came, Loretta stood tall in her Sunday best. Darnell presented the forged deed transfer emails and payment records. Stanley's lawyer barely made a defense. The judge ruled in Loretta's favor. The house deed was reinstated under her name, retroactively corrected. Stanley was ordered to vacate the premises within 14 days. He tried to argue again, said he had nowhere to go, but the judge didn't care. When Loretta returned home 2 weeks later, the house was quiet, dusty, but still standing. Stanley had taken a few things, the TV, some furniture, but left behind the mess and the smell of desperation. Loretta didn't cry. He got to work. She repainted every wall, changed the locks, gutted the master bedroom and turned it into a reading library. She had the kitchen remodeled, not out of need but out of choice. Her fingerprints returned to every corner. The house began to breathe again. And then, just because she could, she had a wind chime installed on the front porch. Every time the breeze passed, it reminded her she was home. Alone, yes, but at peace. She didn't donate the house. She didn't start a scholarship. This time Loretta kept what was hers. Every inch of it. And Stanley? He moved in with a cousin 2 towns over, working night shifts at a hardware store. Sometimes he tried to tell people his version of the story, that Loretta cheated him, that she was bitter. But no one listened. The truth had already won. Loretta didn't need to ruin him. He did that all by himself. She just made sure the deed caught up with the damage. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, folded neatly inside a plain white envelope. It bore the seal of the county court and the unmistakable weight of closure. Loretta turned it over in her hands, letting her fingers trace the edges before finally opening it. The contents were clear. Stanley had officially signed the court documents acknowledging the fraudulent deed transfer. His signature, though shaky, was there in black ink. A final statement from the judge confirmed that all legal claims to the house now rested solely with Loretta Langford. There was no appeal pending. No contest. Just silence. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the letter in the morning light that filtered through her newly installed blinds. The walls were soft gray now, not the faded beige Stanley once insisted on. A fresh vase of wildflowers sat in the center of the table. Her tea had gone cold. For weeks, Loretta had moved quietly through the ruins of what Stanley left behind. He hadn't trashed the house, not overtly. But the damage was in the details. Broken hinges on cabinets. Cigarette burns on the windowsill in the guest bedroom. A large, ugly dent in the refrigerator door, like someone had kicked it during a tantrum. Maybe Crystal. Maybe him. But now it was hers again, entirely. No shadows. No shared ownership. No names beside her own. Still, even after the paperwork, the verdict, and the renovations, Loretta hadn't touched the bedroom closet. That was the last place. The space where she kept the letters Stanley once wrote her during their early years. Birth certificates, photo albums, her mother's Bible. But also, his files. His old documents. The little corners of his life she hadn't dared to destroy, even after everything. Until today. She rose slowly, legs stiff from the cold tile floor. Each step toward the closet felt heavier than the last. She opened the door, braced herself for what memories might creep out. But instead she found it nearly empty. Just one box remained. Heavy. Unlabeled. She pulled it out and opened the lid. Inside were documents. Stacks of them. Some were junk, bank statements, broken pens, a jar of quarters. But wedged between them was something she hadn't expected. A small velvet box. She opened it. It was the engagement ring Stanley had used to propose 41 years ago. Cheap but charming. The stone slightly cracked, the band worn thin. She stared at it for a long while, wondering if he'd meant any of it. The promises. The vows. The future they built. Then she closed the box and walked it to the trash. Stanley's downfall hadn't been loud. It was the slow erosion of someone who thought they could use love as a weapon and still come out clean. Word got around fast in their small town. First, that Loretta had kicked him out. Then that he'd forged documents. Then that Crystal had left him. No one looked at him the same anymore. At the grocery store, people avoided his aisle. At church, he sat alone in the back when he bothered to show up at all. He shaved off his beard and started wearing sunglasses even indoors. Loretta didn't see him often, but when she did, he flinched like a man being hunted by his own guilt. He tried once, just once, to speak to her. It was outside the post office. She was carrying 2 bags of mailing envelopes, and he approached with hunched shoulders and a weak smile. "You look good," he said, as if that made up for it. Loretta didn't stop walking. She didn't look at him. All she said was, "You don't." That was the last time they spoke. Crystal, as expected, vanished. She had taken what she could from Stanley and moved on to the next man. Loretta saw her once, across a parking lot. Crystal was laughing, but it didn't reach her eyes. She looked thinner. Tired. Loretta didn't pity her. Not even a little. As for the house, Loretta turned it into something better than a place to live. She built peace into the structure. She restored her garden and planted new lilies. She hosted a Sunday tea for a few friends who had stuck by her. She bought herself a new record player and played soul music in the evenings, sometimes dancing alone in her socks across the living room floor. She didn't rent out the extra room. She didn't remarry. And she certainly didn't sell the house even when offers came in. It wasn't about money. It was about making it a sanctuary, a fortress, a reminder. The community began to change how they saw her too. No longer the quiet housewife who let things slide. Now she was Loretta Langford, the woman who stood up, fought back, and won. One day, her lawyer Darnell dropped by to check on the final paperwork. As he packed up the last of the files, he paused. "You ever think about selling?" he asked casually. Loretta smiled. "Why would I give up the one place I took back with my own 2 hands?" He laughed, nodded, and said nothing more. That night, Loretta walked out to her porch with a cup of tea. The wind chimes she'd installed after winning the case sang gently in the breeze. She watched the sky change colors as the sun dipped low. The breeze touched her skin like an old friend. Inside, the house stood warm and alive. Outside, the world had kept moving. But here, in the space she reclaimed, everything was exactly how she needed it to be. It was a Wednesday morning when Loretta received the final envelope. Not from the court, not from her lawyer, but from Stanley himself. She found it in her mailbox, unmarked except for her name in his familiar handwriting. For a long while she stood with it in her hands, unsure whether to open it or toss it straight into the trash. But something in her chest, curiosity maybe, urged her to read it. Inside was a single page lined, ripped from a legal pad. "Loretta," it began, "I know I've got no right to write you." That much was true. He rambled. Apologies. Excuses. Mentions of stress, of loneliness, of being lost after retirement. Of how Crystal had twisted his thinking. A desperate man trying to soften the horror of what he'd done. Near the end, he asked if she would ever consider speaking to him again. Loretta didn't cry. Didn't scream. She folded the letter, placed it neatly back in the envelope, and tucked it into a box in her closet. A box labeled "Never Again." Later that afternoon, she finally did something she'd avoided for months. She went to the county office and requested a certified copy of her home deed with her name, only her name, bolded and clean across the top. She had it framed. It now hung just above her fireplace. Not to show off. Not to boast. But to remind herself every day what she had survived. What she had rebuilt. For months Stanley tried calling. She blocked every number. He sent 2 more letters. She burned them. Crystal never reached out again. Rumor had it she moved to Florida with a man 10 years younger and was already being evicted from her new condo. Loretta didn't care. Let the dust settle where it may. Loretta's days slowly grew brighter. She started volunteering at the local food bank again, something she'd stopped doing while married. Every Friday she read stories to children at the library. People in town began stopping her at the market to say things like, "You're an inspiration," or, "You showed us what strength looks like." Felt strange being seen, respected. For so many years she'd made herself small to keep the peace. Now she took up space softly, proudly. In early spring she repainted the front door a bold cranberry red. A small act of rebellion. Stanley had hated bold colors. She planted a new dogwood tree beside the porch, its blossoms reaching out like arms ready to hug the wind. On the porch railing she screwed in a brass plaque that read simply, "Still Standing." One Sunday afternoon her niece Tamika came by for lemonade and cake. They sat under the tree watching the petals drift onto the grass. "You ever think about dating again?" Tamika asked with a teasing smile. Loretta laughed, shook her head. "Baby, I'm dating myself. And I'm the best company I've ever had." It was true. At night the house was quiet but never lonely. She had her music. Her books. Her peace. There was no more arguing about money. No snide remarks when she watched her dramas. No one calling her crazy or too emotional when she wanted to talk. The bathroom counter had only her things. The closet space was finally hers alone. She bought herself satin robes and silk pillowcases, a new mattress, a better coffee maker. All the little things she'd been told were wasteful or unnecessary. One morning she even scheduled a photo shoot, just for herself. In her garden in a yellow dress, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. The photographer asked what the occasion was. She smiled and said, "Freedom." The final legal update came a year to the day after she froze the mortgage. Stanley had defaulted completely. The court had long since sided with her, but now the bank officially closed all claims he'd ever had on the property. She received the last document by certified mail. She popped a bottle of sparkling apple cider and toasted herself in the mirror. "To Loretta Langford," she whispered. "The woman they underestimated." Then she laughed. A big, beautiful, belly-deep laugh that echoed through the house like sunlight. That night, while watering her plants, she paused by the living room window. Outside, the sky had turned lavender with streaks of fading gold. She watched two teenagers walk past, holding hands, laughing softly in the spring dusk. She thought about what she would say to her younger self if she could. Maybe nothing. Maybe just hold her. Let her know she'd be okay. She'd make it out. She did. Loretta took one last look at the world outside her window and turned back to her quiet, joyful home. No husband. No chaos. Just peace.